Is there danger ahead? Danger, danger.
Danger.
Avoiding polyamory risks and threats with Tara and André in just a moment.
Live.
Good morning, André.
Good morning, Tara.
Happy August 14th and Mama's birthday.
Yeah, Mama's birthday.
Oops.
This would be the first year that she's not with me on the planet.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's strange. It's I normally would have for sure sent her a card, made reservations for dinner, called her, talked to her, taken her out, and that physical connection is not there this time. But we're there spiritually. She made me feel acquainted with death, which is kind of strange and wonderful at the same time, right? But it was her offering that death is part of life, and the sooner we accept for that and live life on death's terms, then it makes it easier to go to that other point in our lives, but also to really appreciate what we have in the here and now. So it's pretty fantastic.
Yeah, so celebrating her today. And she would be watching if she was here for sure. She did love watching our live things, which is so interesting, but awesome.
When we look up in the members, right, at the bottom of the page, it always, her little face is always there. Yes. Wasn't she like the second or third member to join us and stuff? Yeah,
she's awesome.
So supportive. Yeah.
All right, well, let's jump into today's live and celebrate Mama.
Yeah.
So welcome to Mondays with Tara and André. Today's topic is danger ahead, avoiding polyamory risks and threats. So I'm Tara. For people who don't know me, I'm a relationship and awesomeness coach specializing in consensual non-monogamy.
Right. And I am André Turcotte. I am a registered sex-positive psychotherapist.
Awesome. And we are together, TNA, and we started Let's Talk Polyamory as a way of connecting with other humans across the planet who are navigating non-monogamy and open relationships, and to help support and share what we know and what we've learned, which is why this is a really great topic, because we face some of these risks and threats for sure.
You say we're connecting people around the globe, and it's true, right? It's amazing how this has taken off organically. And Mama thought that was so wonderful. I remember when we first moved to Toronto, and when I first moved to Toronto, and it hadn't been that long after she joined us in Toronto, and we were going out doing our events, and there's always something to do. And she goes, "My God, you know a lot of people." And it's just because we kind of fell into this wonderful open relating community, and then there were like all these offerings, and it's interesting, right? Like all that there was to be in there.
Awesome. So let us know in the comments if you're joining us live or in the replay, and where in the world you're joining us from, because we love to know where everybody's from, and also that you can hear us and everything. That's always helpful as well.
And even giving us a thumbs up or any indication that there's life out there, is because it's amazing, because while we are doing this in the studio, we can look and see that there's like one person watching us. That's probably from my phone. But then we come to find out later, like yesterday we were walking Parade, and one of our friends was like, "Oh yeah, like I love your podcast. Like, they really are informative, blah, blah, blah." And it's like, I had no idea that they were watching. And a lot of people often say that. So if you are out there, it's wonderful to know that we are not just existing in this vacuum of our mind.
Oh, yay, Saskatchewan.
And hello. And yesterday here in Montreal was Montreal's Pride. They don't do it in July like the rest of in June like the rest of the world, because it is Saint Jean Baptiste Day. So they have their priorities set, but they did have a parade yesterday, and it was incredible. We walk in most parades, but how long the parade route was. It was like really long.
It was long.
It was a huge
I'm exhausted.
Yeah, a lot of people. It was fun though. Good exhaustion.
Yeah, good exhaustion. Great to connect with people and celebrate, celebrate the way we love, because we were with the polyamorous group, which was awesome, from Quebec, and just all those people are also polyamorous. So it was kind of fun, and queer and open and that sort of thing. So.
Yeah, it's interesting, because I was wondering at one point, being in the parade, what's the reason that I'm walking this parade, right? Because at one point it felt like there were a lot of people on the spectators, on the sidelines, who didn't look like they associated or identified in the LGBTQ2IA+ community. And it was like, well, are they just simply tourists? Are they curious, or what's the story? And I was like, well, what's my part in this parade? And then I thought about it, and I thought, really, I'm walking here because it is wanting to normalize and help destigmatize being any way other than the norm. Yes. And it was important for me to have that exposure and help invite a safe place for other people to do it. And then what was also quite fantastic about yesterday's parade, and I know I'm going off on a tangent, I'm getting a circular
I want to get them to the dangers ahead.
It was that, well, this is the danger, was that at one point at exactly 2:30, the entire city, the entire parade shut down and was silent for a moment. And it was really wonderful to reflect on that. And, what did it mean to have all of that, and all the people who had unfortunately died through AIDS or through any kind of violence abuse, or still underground, and who were silent by it, really brought home. But then it also made me think about currently how, unfortunately, we are always having to maintain and advocate for our rights, and how those rights are being silenced and eradicated by other people not far, in countries very close to ours, or in countries further from us. And we must remain diligent, never taking for granted that we have. It's kind of like losing mama, kind of thinking that, well, my friends and my family are always there. And it does sound perhaps cliche, but don't take it for granted, rather, that you have these things. And being quiet during that was a reminder. Don't take for granted that you have the right to communicate or express yourself openly, because it's not always been the case, and it may not always be the case. So we must be stewards of that. So anyway, back to our program.
Back to our program.
And I didn't even mention anything about STD.
No, we're getting to that. You can do that later.
We'll see.
Okay, so we're talking today about the dangers ahead. So like avoiding polyamory risks and threats. So because I think when people think about opening up a relationship or becoming polyamorous, it's like, ooh, super exciting. You get to meet new people, have new adventures, sexual or emotional relationships. What could possibly go wrong? Yeah, what could possibly go wrong? And I think we, like many other people, underestimated some of the bumps and things that could come up. So that's why we're sharing today some of the things that you may need to be aware of, or maybe you're smack dab in the middle of it, and maybe it'll help to feel like you're not the only one that faces these things. So let's jump in. Let us know in the chat if there's risks or threats that came up for you that you didn't expect, or that you're in the middle of, and maybe we missed it on the list. So so let's jump in.
Yeah, by all means, it's not exhaustive, right? There's a whole bunch of
it's not exhaustive.
But these are just some of the points that we thought we should bring light to.
So the first one is that you're going to feel different than you might imagine.
Right. So our fantasies might create one experience, one expectation, and the actual might be something entirely different. And I think about that when I travel, right? And I think, I'm going to go to this place, and it's going to be, there's not going to be anybody else on the beach. There'll be nobody in the airports, none of this. And the reality is often quite different. But how would it be any different in my expectations of what, open relating is going to be like compared to what it could actually be like?
Yeah, I think what surprises people is that they experience more jealousy than they thought they would, because they may not have ever thought themselves as a jealous person.
And it's not part of our fantasy either. Right?
It's not part of our fantasy. And because you've been in monogamous relationships, you haven't necessarily had the same exposure to things that might make you feel insecure. And I think people are surprised sometimes, and I think I was surprised at what might trigger me.
Well, it's amazing, right? Because being in a monogamous relationship, maybe we're out at a cafe and some guy looks at you, or you look at some guy, and I'm like, ooh, that kind of makes me feel jealous. But we're talking about a whole another level. Like, we had an experience where we were kind of already into it. We went to a party, a sex party, and I saw you with somebody else in a very intimate way. And I was like, wow, I wasn't prepared for that. And here I am, some big sexpert thinking, wow, I can handle all of this. I'm prepared for everything. It was not the case. So we might not know what we don't know until we get there, but we can, through conversations like this, become alerted to the idea, well, this is something that might come up, and you could consider it, and then you could kind of frame it and say, well, how would I feel if that were to happen, and how would my partner respond, and what would happen? We can talk about these things and play them out beforehand, and it might save you a lot of feelings of discomfort, because I remember we didn't have that conversation beforehand.
No.
And I was feeling uncomfortable, and wow, I was so lucky to have a partner like you who did check in and see how was I doing, because had you been just totally preoccupied in your own, I might have felt very uncomfortable, and then created a whole different narrative and said, well, you know what, this whole thing is not for me, and I don't want to ever have to feel this way again, and I could have just turned from it, and I would have missed out on a lot of other wonderful things and some other heartbreak. heartbreak too, but some wonderful things. So let's not turn away from it just because of one unfortunate thing. We can learn from that and then go forward. And we can also go back and say, you know what, I did have that. I realized it's really not for me, and that's fine too. Or we could say, well, I enjoyed part of it, but I didn't like this part. Let's modify these little parts. Let's have a conversation about it. Let's talk about it, and then I can come to another point and make the informed decision.
Yeah, so some of the things that might trigger you is when a partner's on a date and when you're not on a date. You might think, oh yeah, no big deal, I can do something. But then people do tend to create a lot of stories in their head about what's going on that date, how someone feels about someone, etc.
Yeah, and there's opportunity to create that your own narrative without anything to counter it, right? So I can just start inflating things and say, oh, they never feel this way, or they're always doing this, and that's just not necessarily accurate or true. So now we've become aware of our possibility to invite that kind of thing, and we say, well, wait a second, am I being really fair and accurate? Are these the facts, or are they simply the feelings that I'm inflating to create this feeling and story in myself? So we keep that in check. Yes.
All right. So you may, something else that might trigger feelings that you're not expecting is, like, say, for example, if there's an imbalance. So you're meeting more people than me, I'm meeting more people than you, and then that may bring on some feelings of, inadequacy, not being special, that sort of thing.
And that does happen. So how might you counter that? So I'm going out and I'm having a lot of activity, and it's, a lot of flurry of activity, and you're kind of like crickets. Like, how do you?
Well, for me, I find, it doesn't matter to me if you're dating more than me now. I think I look forward to those points for the opportunities to do other things that I enjoy doing. And so, yeah.
So would you go so far as, if I tell you that I have a date coming up on Thursday, then you might actively look to set something on your calendar? Or do you just leave it open and say, well, I'll leave it open, I'll see how I feel. And then if you find yourself alone that night, do you find something to do, or do you simply allow for it? In other words, is there a danger if you don't? Will you then be setting yourself up for that void, that possible absence of, does that create the opportunity for these feelings?
Yeah. I mean, you could plan something, or you might not, but I think it's just being good to be aware of it.
Right. So plan something up, because that makes me think that other people think, sometimes I've heard other people say, well, if my partner has a date, then I better have a date to counter that.
No, I think that's I think setting up, and people do set up that rule, and I think that's something you should be aware of, because I think it's prone to disaster for sure, because it's just really hard to do people's schedules, meeting people, and that sort of thing. And anyways, well, we could go on and on about this.
Sure, but that makes me think about that feast or famine thing that we'll get into later, also about scheduling becoming polysaturated.
Yeah. So another thing that you risk is that your attachment style, you're going too far, your attachment style and the style of others that you're in relationships with may have some pretty major impacts. So I think one of the common things that happens when people open up is, say you're in a monogamous relationship, married, not married, whatever, there's a security in the structure of the relationship. And as soon as you decide to open up or become polyamorous, then you sort of lose that security of the structure. And so then you have to rely on other things to make you feel secure in that relationship. And so if you haven't worked on those things or are aware of them, there are definitely things to do. So like one of the things that, they talk about in being polysecure is being having a secure base and a safe haven. And so those are two essential elements. So and then also the other point is around attachment is other people that you're in a relationship may have insecure attachment. So you may be dating, you may meet someone and date them. And if they're solo, or even if with their partner, if you're not around or you don't text them a certain amount, then they may feel insecure, right? So people have, and we have a whole talk on attachment, but it's definitely something to be aware of that. I mean, I certainly wasn't aware of before we opened our relationship.
But it makes me think of the three levels of attachment then, right? Because we have secure attachment with ourselves, secure attachment in our representation of our relationship, and then secure attachment in our community or the world outside. And how will we navigate all of those? And maybe we don't practice that secure attachment. Maybe it's not familiar to us, but it's not to say that we cannot achieve that. There are things we can do to address and offset any kind of anxiety or avoidance that we might have in order to allow for the expression of being more secure with ourselves and with others.
Yeah, so one of the things that we teach in our open relationship and polyamory mastery program is being aware of your attachment triggers and how to address them. And there's a great, a viewer has a great idea. A lot of people think you have to have a date but call a friend, take yourself to a park with a book, make it something celebratory for yourself. I love that. That's definitely what I do.
Yeah.
And I think you do that too, right?
But it's interesting looking at the shift, because there were times when you went on a date and I didn't have anything and I did not plan well and I was left to my own devices, and I went more towards the what if scenarios and those creating these fantastic dates for you. And my jealousy was really in the driver's seat, as compared to feeling more secure within myself, which allowed for compersion. Then I was like, wow, she's out having fun. Like, that's so cool. Like, I hope she's having a good time. And then I feel enriched by that. But that's a whole nother level. But that's something to think of as well. But one of the benefits to having some of those provisions in place if you do choose to.
Yeah. And if anybody doesn't know their attachment style, or there's a quiz we like, it's not our own, it's someone else's, we can share that with you. So just drop attachment or send me a message and in the comments, and we'll make sure we send that to you.
Yeah. I find that people's awareness of their attachment style is growing. It is becoming part of the lexicon. 10 years ago, nobody spoke about it, and it's becoming part of our vernacular.
You say that, but I think it's people who we know and we meet in polyamorous circles, I think, know their attachment style. I often mention to other people who aren't, and they aren't necessarily aware of it. It's sort of like fringe understanding.
Interesting.
And may not be aware that that's actually impacting them. I actually know a woman who's a dating coach, and one of the things she teaches women is about attachment. And it's kind of interesting when you know what your attachment style is.
Well, it helps to inform you, right? And then when you come into a situation, you feel a certain way, you might say, oh, well, that's because of this, that, and the other thing.
Yeah.
Or the person across from you who you're speaking to, when they act or don't act a certain way, you might think to yourself, I wonder if that is an indication of their attachment style. And it helps to inform us, and then we might be able to go at it with less friction.
Yeah, and I think you use it as a point of data, not as an excuse. Oh, well, I'm anxious, so you must do this or you must do that. I think that is a risk that some people go, well, like, oh, now I know that I'm an anxious attachment, then that just means that you have to be this or that, or I'm avoidant, so I don't have to come to you and solve a problem. You should let me go and do my own thing.
So they'll use their diagnosis to enable their behavior. Or to
so it's more to inform and be data in order to address those things. So.
Well, it's really the idea for me is that it's going to help decrease the level of discomfort we might have. So if I am by nature anxious avoidant, I am feeling a level of discomfort in that, right? I want to avoid those situations I feel anxious by. Whereas if I get that data, then I can say, well, I'm aware of what's going on. I have an idea of what's at play, and I can go around this other way. I can be these other ways of being, where I can interact in a different way that makes me feel more comfortable.
Yeah. Do you think that people can have like situational attachment issues,
without a doubt,
with certain relationships, if things are uncertain or something that you may feel like? Because I see myself more as securely attached, but I think there's situations that make me feel more anxious depending on who I'm engaging with and that sort of thing.
I think that's the right feeling. Absolutely. If you are with a pack of lambs, you're going to feel pretty okay. But if you're with a pack,
they're so cozy.
But if you're with a school of sharks, you're going to feel a different way. There are inductions, right? We might feel a certain way. But if your core really is secure, you might also recognize that and say, well, I am feeling these different things, but essentially I know I'm okay. I'm securely attached. And off we go.
It could be an indication of something. The same thing with jealousy. Sometimes jealousy is something that's a warning sign, and feeling, if you're normally more securely attached and you're feeling anxious in a situation, sometimes it's important to pay attention to that.
Without a doubt. So. Well, yeah, I always say, our intuition is there to inform us. Do we pay enough attention to it?
So one of the other things, risks, dangers, your expectations may be different than what you experience in real life. So we already talked a bit about, you may or may not meet people right away. Another thing that comes up, if you're a couple and wanting to match with other couples, that is like, people are like, oh, I can't find a match, but it's hard. Like, it's hard enough to find a 2-person match. Now you have 4 people or more in the mix that you're trying to, our friends were telling us yesterday about going somewhere and meeting a couple, and they really like the one person, but not necessarily the other person as much. I mean, sorry, go ahead.
Well, no, I mean, yeah, you're absolutely right. So like, it's just, it increases with the amount of variables. So it's like, it's gone from 2 people now to like 3 or 4 or 5. And we have to also like each other enough. And then we get to the practical part of even scheduling. And now it's like, we're checking each other's computers and schedules to find out if it's actually going to match. So, I mean, there's so many things at play. It almost at times feels too fantastic. But when it does come together, it is quite fantastic. But it also reminds me a bit of the feast and famine thing. Was that too soon?
Yeah. No, you can talk about that. Feast and famine.
Well, it's like, I've experienced this, and I'm sure you might have as well. The idea that there's times when there's so many invitations going on, there's so many parties, there's so many dates, there's so many alluring things to be part of, that it's like, well, how can I squeeze them all in at the same time? It's like a feast. It's this huge buffet, and I want to eat it all. And then there's other times when it's nothing but crickets. You check to see, is my phone still working? Is the battery dead? Like, what's going on? Like, there's nothing. I can't sell myself. I can't give it away. I can't I can't buy it. It's just, there's nothing out there happening. And it's funny, do I have the same feelings throughout? I don't personally. When it's feast, I'm just going at it, and I go to my belly is full, and I think, wow, this is amazing, and like it's going to live forever. And then when the famine comes, I think, oh my God, what have I done? And I personalize it, and I think it's never going to course correct, and I'll always be alone, and I'll never have this. And what am I doing in this scenario? And why did I invite this? So I think if I can temper both those situations and remind myself that the feast and the famine, they do pass, and that there's benefits to both. But it's interesting how it can come in these waves, right?
Yeah, and to know that it's not, it's just like dating is hard. Meeting people that you match with is hard too. And then you have the added thing that you need to meet people who are also open to you being open. And, and sometimes that's a hard situation. And sometimes people will say yes and like, okay, this sounds fine. And then when they get attached, they don't necessarily like it. They're like, I'm not sure I like you being open, sort of thing. So those are some of the things to be aware of. And relating to that is that some people, when they first decide to, if it's a couple opening up, they're like, okay, we're just going to have sex. It's going to be sex only. And then boom, somebody becomes emotionally attached. So I think that's one thing that people experience that they may not expect, is that you become more emotionally attached to people than you might have guessed.
It makes me think of one of your favorite rules. Actually, I'm being sarcastic. You hate it. Is when people try and open up a relationship and they have agreements in place or a rule that says, well, you cannot fall in love with somebody. It's very scary, right? What's going to happen to us if I fall in love with somebody else? But how do you ever create that kind of rule? I mean, you might in your mind say, well, we're going to, limit the amount of exposure. We're going to do this and that. But the heart often wants what the heart wants.
Yeah, and I think it's also, when that does happen, it's hard to get your mind around that you can't be emotionally attached to more than one people. I think for me, I think that was a hangover from growing up monogamous and that sort of thing, is like, if I'm with a partner and they really love somebody, like emotionally attached, seriously attached, then that must mean that they can't love me as much. Right. And I think that's a common thing people face and have to sort of overcome, that there's an abundance of love, and we can love people for different reasons. And it doesn't necessarily, go ahead.
Well, yeah, it doesn't necessarily mean that it's going to be the end of one relationship because you love somebody else. Because, the ice cream scenario, right? We love chocolate, we love vanilla, we love strawberry, and we don't stop loving vanilla because we love chocolate and strawberry. We just love them as well. Yeah.
And because they're different.
Right.
So I'm curious, I would love to know in the comments if people have experienced any of these things and how you've dealt with them.
But it goes back to the first axiom: communication, communication, communication. We ask that you always be open and ethical about it. And even if it is the most difficult thing to admit that you're having or catching feelings for somebody else, inform your partner so that they can be consenting and say, well, yes, I still want to be part of this, or you know what, I've decided now that maybe it's not the thing for me. So really the ethical part, the consensual part, the communication is always the basis. So important.
Yeah. So this section was about expectations. So I think you talked about, when we were prepping for this, you said that it may be benefit to have no expectations and just to enjoy the experience, or low expectations.
Yeah. Yeah. But know that, like, you have your fantasies and they're wonderful. They might create your expectations, but that it may not go that way. And can you release your ego's desire to have it go that way and be flexible in it? Because you will be creating less bumps in the road for yourself if you were able to be more flexible. So manage your expectations.
I'm thinking about when my friend and I went to see Hamilton. It was so the play. It was so hyped up by people, and I went in thinking like, I'm gonna love this, and then I didn't love it, and then I was like, oh, wah, wah. So it's like, I probably should have gone in just like, I don't know what this is about. This is just going to be a great experience, and then just experience for that great experience, rather than it has to be a certain way.
But how do we manage our expectations? I mean, like, if I'm in a closed relationship and or we're in a closed relationship and we decide that we're going to open it up, we have expectations of what it might be like. We have fantasies, we have thoughts. how do I manage those? How, like, I think it's going to be this way, or we save up our money, we go on this crazily expensive cruise or to this destination. We have these expectations of how it's going to be. How do we manage it in case it's not that way? What are we going to do to, offset any kind of potential disappointment?
I think that's a long answer, but I think it's around your beliefs and being present in the moment.
Oh, that's a good point. Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
Okay. So one of the other dangers, risks, things is that there's things that you don't know about that you'll be confronted with. So I think people, if anybody's in any of the poly groups or swinger groups on Facebook or anything like that, you may have heard the term unicorn hunting and unicorns. We're not going to go into detail, but it's definitely something that if you're a couple and looking to meet another person, a third, that you may be confronted with this idea, or that you are unicorn hunting and having some couples privilege. So there's a bunch of terms and stuff that you may need to know about before going in, just so you're aware.
But now, to be fair, I want to also say that unicorn hunting is not looked at in a bad light by everybody. In fact, some people celebrate it. Some people are wanting to be unicorns and want to be hunted, and some people love that. So it's, don't yuck everybody's yum.
Exactly.
Right? Yeah. So you might think that it's not politically correct. You might not like it, but other people might subscribe to it. And we like to believe that there is enough space on the flag for everybody, right? We are wanting to be inclusive of that.
So being prepared that people may yuck your yum. That's
another one. Yeah. Because, I might like stinky feet and the majority of people might say, oh, that's disgusting. But if it turns me on, so be it. But because you don't like it doesn't mean that I need to hear that you don't like it, right? We are wanting to maintain our spaces. As Mama always said, your rights end where mine begin, and my rights end where yours begin. We have these parameters, boundaries, and we recognize each other and we allow for that. It's important.
Yeah.
Which makes me think of the next one, consent.
Consent, so, yes. Consent is something that I don't think I was as aware of before becoming polyamorous, for sure.
Nowhere near at the level I'm at now. And there were a couple of painful bumps in the road that really informed me about the consent. And here to warn you, in one of those warnings, you might feel wonderful about it, but we don't know necessarily how the other person feels about it. So we ask them first. So we were at a parade yesterday, and there was somebody who was very enthusiastic about giving hugs, and I love hugs. I really do. I am like the hugger. But this person came and wanted to hug me and the people that were in our group without asking them. And while, like I said, I'm down for hugs, it would have been better that they had checked in first and said, would you be open to a hug? Rather than being insistent upon hugging. So little things like that, you might think, well, who cares? But it might also be an indication. For sure, make an impression or be an indication of how you are in bigger things as well. If you don't take the time to ask for consent on a hug, how are you at other things? You just assume. And people may be off-put by that and might not ever say anything to you. They might simply retract. They might even be conscious of it, but they may decide, well, that's not quite where I'm wanting to be. And then you might not even know. So be aware of that.
Consent. Yeah. So learn about consent and what it means. And that's something we cover in our poly newbies. Somebody's asking, what was the question? I'm working in the background while watching. I'm glad you're watching and listening. The question was about, I think about expectations you had that were not met or that surprised you, or threats. Yeah, I think so. We were talking about threats. Depends on when they jumped in. Okay. So the other thing, this one was around things you probably don't know that you'll be confronted with. So other people's rules. Yeah. So sometimes if say you go to date someone and maybe they're partnered, they may have a rule or an agreement that you're not informed about. So, and that can impact you. Yeah, for sure. Some people have veto rules. So you may meet someone and go like, hey, you're cool and I like you and let's date. And then they have to go ask their partner for permission. And so that can bump up. People bump up into that sort of thing. So that's where communication.
Yeah. Or even like people's rules, like they might say, we don't have sex without condoms, or we don't do French kissing, or we don't do anal, or whatever it might be. They may have.
We don't fall in love.
We don't fall in love.
We can only date on Thursdays. I can only go out with you, when my partner has a date. Like there's a lot of things like that people end up bumping into, I think. So just being aware that that's sort of out there. And
the awareness comes in being able to ask other people or have them inform or re-inform other people of our particulars, our preferences.
So another thing that may surprise you is new relationship energy,
Ooh,
also
NRE.
known as NRE, yes, and how it can impact you, either yourself getting into NRE or your partner having NRE.
Or the other person having NRE towards you.
Yes.
You might be the bee's knees to them and they think, wow.
Yeah, so it can cause some issues. People have, it's one of the things to sort of get over. Like, you meet somebody and you're really excited about them and you want to share the information and they just seem like amazing, right?
Well, yeah, it's also interesting too, because you and I, 25 years ago when we met, we had this NRE, but it was just, wow, we were just like doing it. And I don't know that we necessarily stop and think, wow, like I'm feeling this new energy that's coming through. And then
I just want that.
And here we are, we settle in, we're doing our thing, going back and forth, living our life. And then all of a sudden we meet somebody and there's this NRE. And now I'm like, wow, like I haven't seen you like that in a long time, or I haven't seen you with that level of enthusiasm, or myself, whatever it is. And where is this coming from? Right? So it's like it might have been dormant for a while. And now we come to see that there is this expression that is exciting and it's new and it's everything. And watching you participate in that, I might think, what about me? Like, wasn't my loving so fantastic? And sure, it's good, but it doesn't have that same honeymoon feel to it anymore. So just be aware that might be a component going on for yourself or your partner or your partners.
Yeah, and I think if you're the one experiencing NRE towards someone, it may put this idea in your mind, cast doubt on your other relationships, like, oh, if I'm having this feeling for this person, I mustn't feel this way for this person. Right. And so just being aware that new relationship energy is super powerful, and it may not mean that. It may mean that. It may cast light on something that you weren't paying attention to, but it may also just be, it's just different. So
yeah. And because it's just different, new and shiny, does that mean we get rid of the old for that new thing and then only to have that become old?
But sometimes new relationship energy can bring energy to your existing relationships too. So that's kind of fun as well.
Yeah. So. And it's fun if you open it up and you are both experiencing NRE for the others. That can be a lot of fun too, because then it's a shared thing. And it will feel bonding rather than maybe excluding.
Yeah, like we have a couple that we see, and I feel like we always have NRE with them. We saw them yesterday. Well, we saw a few of them yesterday, and every time we're with them, I'm just like, oh, I feel so like loved, and I always feel the good energy. How about you?
Yeah, but I do that every time I see my friends. I mean,
that's true.
I've got so many people that create that feeling with me, and that is what I think one of the things that brings me back to open relating is that I often do get that new injection of like, wow, it's so good to see you again, and feeling that connection. Not to take away from you, I always feel connected. I feel very secure, and I love that. And I appreciate it. But demonstrating it, feeling it, experiencing it on the outside with others, really, it's just so exciting. It's so captivating.
Yeah. So other things that you may not know about that you may be confronted with. So etiquette associated with certain things. Like, for example, I think about parties and events, and that there's, consent we mentioned, but there's other like little things like, I don't know, thinking about.
If you're at a sex party and everybody's nude and you go to sit down, do you put a towel down?
Yes, like little things
nude?
like that. Yeah. Like how to be, we did a whole episode for parties on how to be a good guest, a great guest and a great host.
Yeah.
And that may be things that you never even thought about or what to have ready for a party. You know what I mean?
What about etiquette? Like even before we get to the parties, just like exploring each other. For example, dick pics, right?
Oh, yes.
Some people really love receiving or sending dick pics, and other people are like, no, like unless I ask you for it, do not be sending me JJ pics or dick pics. No, never.
Never for me.
Never for you.
Never for me.
But that could fall under etiquette, right? So is it good form or bad form? And there may be other things that you are not yet aware of and may come to find out later on. But you might also imagine, how would it be if I were on the other side of this? So try and always have that consideration. How am I going to, what would it be like to receive what I am offering?
Yeah. So ghosting is a thing that I think comes in play as well, because you can end up being in more complex situations of relationships. And so people, you may not even know it, but you may be chatting with someone, or maybe even had a date or a couple of dates, and then all of a sudden, boom, they're like gone. Because whatever happened in their relationships, they might have closed up. There might be other factors and stuff. So just being aware. We did a whole thing on ghosting as well. We have a lot of content. I'm just like, I don't want to get too much into
okay, so I won't even mention anything about the dating apps. Sorry, next.
Yeah, so ghosting. It can be a small community. So poly, open, swinger, lifestyle communities can be small.
Mm-hmm.
So you may date someone, break up, or things may not work out, and you may run into them again.
Mm-hmm.
I feel like it's a small world situation.
Yeah.
Or a partner you have may end up dating a partner that you had before. So these things kind of like, I feel like they're like.
Yeah, and does that make for like the perfect landscape for like a rumor mill where people start to know each other and say, "Oh, did you hear about X?" and da da da?
It might. I mean, I don't think I've run into that situation, but this is where one of the other things we're going to talk. Oh, I guess I might as well say it. So I'll jump ahead and then go back to the other one. So, for example, if you made a mistake or you did something or someone felt that you did something wrong to them, it can sometimes be difficult to resolve, even within the community. And because it's a small community, it could spread. For example, like maybe you won't get invited to certain events anymore, or there'll be a certain perception that someone will share about you that might be shared with others. So it's something to be aware of.
Yeah, it surely is.
Yeah. There's no jewelry thing. And then the other thing that I want to share is that if you're identify as a man, you may be experiencing this, is that single or solo men in polyamory, open relationships, lifestyle sometimes have a harder time. I feel like sometimes there's not different rules, but certain things can happen. Like I think about consent because I experience this, I see it happening. So a woman goes up to a woman and touches her hand or like hugs her or something like that. And if it's a woman to a woman or even a woman to a man, it may not be seen as like, it may not have the same impact as when a man might just hug a woman or touch someone without asking. Yeah. Like you gave the example the other day of like people like smacking you on the ass. Like people do that because you have a beautiful one. I can't remember what it is in French they were saying to us yesterday. I think it's like little buns. Anyways.
Oh, the bun pain? No, the pain of face.
Yeah, pain of face, yes.
Aspirin.
Aspirin.
The French.
But like we've gone places and people just smack you on the ass. Even when we were walking around in Pride, not so much here as much, but in Toronto. Yeah. And nobody would have done that to me. No. And so it's really interesting that there's different rules.
And it's not just men who are grabbing my ass or slapping my ass.
Yes, women too. So there seems to be like different rules, but also like there's places like where men are not as welcome as solo. Like if you go to a club or a party.
Not only not welcome, just not accepted, not allowed.
Yeah, not allowed.
And which is unfortunate because a lot of these places build themselves as being, body positive and very incorporating and really, wanting to create community. And yet they will specifically identify one form of genital representation, as male presenting people. And the logic is, well, because some of these guys, they come in and they're not so appropriate and they're not really reading the temperature of the room. And we get it. It kind of creates a sticky, unfeeling, maybe even creepy environment. So we don't want that. But then are we simply excluding all these other guys, all these guys who are perfectly wonderful and fantastic and loving and would be okay just because, they're grouped in the same way and easily identified that way, and it becomes kind of guilty by association. And it doesn't feel like it is as educating or as incorporating as it wants to be. It feels like it's more excluding without ever exploring that. And then it can make people feel very outside of this loving community, and it's unfortunate that way.
Yeah, I wish it could be different. I just don't know how to affect change on it because we've experienced ourselves being at a club and that sort of thing and engaging in things, and then all of a sudden everybody was around us, and it does feel uncomfortable. Our friends were also talking about being in France where there's the nude community and that Cap d'Agde, and a couple would have sex on the beach and then all of a sudden there was these men surrounding them like pleasuring themselves over them, and it's like maybe they wanted that, but also I mean I wouldn't
Yeah, and also it'd be, imagine what the scenario would be like. You're doing it on the beach, and then the first guy comes over and asks for consent. That's wonderful. And the next one, and like 500 people, like they're always interrupting your flow as you're always, having the grand consent and stuff.
Yeah.
But maybe it's with maybe the other people who are wanting that could kind of step back and say, well, they're doing the thing. I want to be the voyeur. They're doing it in public, so I guess they don't mind being the exhibitionist. But I should also at the same time be mindful that I don't want to be over present in there.
Mm-hmm. I like that somebody just wrote in the comments that one of my big surprises is that my feelings of jealousy can sneak up on me when I'm feeling more emotionally invested in a relationship. Surprised when I felt jealous of my meta with a new partner that I really fell hard for. That's interesting. Yeah, because these situations are crossing and that sort of thing. Okay, so one of the other dangers, warnings, risks is that you're not as great a communicator as you thought you might have been, and that you're going to need to communicate more within your relationships than you ever have before. So I think the thing that people say is polyamory is more about communication than about sex than you might imagine. And it's 100% true. Yeah.
But, you can learn to become a very good communicator, right?
Yes.
So maybe you don't necessarily have the tools. Maybe we didn't take that course in high school, but we can definitely
Was there a course?
No, I don't think there is, unfortunately.
Not a course.
No. But we can definitely learn to improve our ways of communicating. And in the beginning, it might seem like, oh my God, it's like such a pain in the ass. Why bother? But it does get easier, and we learn to integrate it, and it becomes part of our way of communicating. And then once we learn how to communicate effectively and well, then it opens it up to so many other wonderful possibilities, and we don't even think about it. We are just naturally communicating well, so we can learn how to do that for sure.
Yeah, so some conversations are difficult than others. We need to learn I needed to learn how to share what I wanted and what I felt. And I think sometimes people are afraid of doing that, especially when they open up an existing relationship, because you want your partner to be happy, and you might agree to things that you aren't as comfortable with, and then have all these feelings and then don't know how to share because you're saying, well, you said it was okay, and now I'm having these feelings. So those are sort of some of the things that people have to learn how to navigate.
Sure. Or how to establish our boundaries and let it be known what we're not wanting, right? What we're wanting less of, or what's not working well for us. How do we bring that up, and how can we bring it up comfortably? And while it might feel uncomfortable initially, we do it because it is our rights, and it is respecting how we feel, and also it's informing our partner. So it's very important.
Exactly. And then, so then the final one, I think this is the final one, is you're not as prepared as you thought. So I think it's related to all these things that you may open up without really thinking about all these things that we talked about already. And you may not know exactly what you want, and how important it is to kind of at least know where you're starting from and what you want, and if you're within a relationship already, what you both want, and how to make that happen for both of you. So, because I think sometimes people have a different idea of how you're opening up, and may make assumptions around it. Certainly, we've heard that from people that have had that situation. Well, I thought we were doing this, and yet you went on and did this. I thought you were going to tell me when you got emotionally close to someone, and then having different definitions of being emotionally close.
Which again, all comes back to the very basic idea of communication, right? That we might have a similar understanding, or an understanding of what our partner means and what it is that they're wanting and not wanting. And can we find where we do have that overlap? And can we also recognize where there is not that overlap, and how will we negotiate it? And it all, again, comes down to our ability to communicate openly and honestly.
So that's, you're not 100% clear on your personal boundaries until someone crosses them. I think that sometimes that surprises people.
Right. So better to get clarity beforehand. Right?
Exactly. Yeah. We did a talk on that and have a great worksheet associated with that. How important it is to have agreements in your relationships. So rather than rules, people default to rules, but we talk about in our programs about creating values-based agreements. So what you value in your relationships and creating agreements around that. This one's, we get to the one that you wanted to mention at the beginning, which was STI testing and communicating your results with your partners. So, of course, you're going to, if you have multiple partners, there's a potential of exposing yourself to additional risks. Having said that, I think that my experience has been that people that we are in relationships with tend to get tested more frequently and know where they're at. Then I would have. I mean, I don't think I ever got tested when I was swingle. What do you call it? Single and monogamous.
But absolutely, the people in this community that I've come across, and myself being one of them as well, speak so freely about STI testing and the awareness that we have as a community. So I'm not alone in this. I'm not just by myself. My actions affect other people, and their actions affect me too. And we try to talk about STI testing and perhaps even contracting something in a very matter-of-fact, clinical kind of way, because there is no moral indication towards this. If somebody catches a cold, I don't think, oh my God, what a dirty person. How can they do that? Like, they must be, what else are they doing? Like, they just caught a cold. And it is not dissimilar to this as well. These are communicable things, and on occasion, it might happen. So if it does, it's penciled down, everybody. We stop right there. We alert our partners so they can alert their partners, and we get tested, and we wait for the results, and we know that we are doing the right thing. But we are also, most importantly, normalizing the conversation. We are not going into the back rooms thinking that it's embarrassing or that, it's taboo to talk about anything. And the more we talk about it, the more easy it becomes to do so. And we keep ourselves and our community healthy and loving.
So I think the other things people may not be prepared for is that you may experience added anxiety or stress or even depression from managing multiple relationships or dealing with breakups.
Sure.
Because some relationships, some poly or open relationships can be a bit transient, depending on what's happening in other. There's other factors. I feel like it's not like one person dating one person. Sometimes it's one person dating a person who's with a person and a person. And if they have other situations happening, it could impact you. And I think I was surprised at a breakup that I had with somebody. They were looking for something a little different, but we were quite close. And it was hard. It's a bit of a. And you were an amazing partner when I was going through that, because you understood that I had to sort of grieve that relationship. And it didn't, because I was grieving that relationship, it didn't really say anything about our relationships. It just was about that one. So anyways, yeah. And then the other one you mentioned at the beginning is becoming polysaturated. So having too much and then having to navigate all that can be difficult. So
too many invitations.
Too many invitations.
What a problem to have.
Yeah. Well, it's one of the common things people say they struggle with in this is like managing a calendar and trying to be fair to partners. And that's definitely something that's going to come up, especially if if you're married or in a relationship where you have a family or kids and stuff like that. And then you have all these other relationships. Like, how do you balance all that? Yeah.
It makes me think of the hierarchy that's often looked at in dating, that right? Like having primaries or nesting partners, and then all the way to anarchists, right? Relationship anarchists are like, no, it doesn't. That doesn't factor into it. We feel a certain way towards whoever it is, or certain whatever the criteria is, but it's not subscribing to this type of hierarchy.
Yes.
That wasn't well said.
Relationship anarchy is that you co-create each individual relationship, and one relationship isn't more important than others. They're just different and they are their own things.
Sure, but I think the example that's often used with that is when people say, well, if my primary partner was at home, but you were in an accident, I'm not going to simply say, well, let me, prioritize them because they are my so-called primary partner. It's who would need me, and I want to avail myself to them.
Yeah.
And that seems to demonstrate less of a hierarchy.
Yeah. We didn't mention it, but I think the other thing people come up against is like specialness in relationships. And that's, when someone you're with is in other relationships, you may not feel as special. And then having to redefine what special is to you. So, okay. So we gave you a list of a lot of things, the dangers, risks, and things to be aware of. So we're not going to go into detail, but how do you overcome these? So we talked a bit about these things, but I think one of the first things is becoming informed about what's out there, the risks, the threats, all the things we've spoken about. We also mentioned learning how to communicate and practicing it. And one of the things that we teach in our programs is our attunement communication method. When you become attuned to your partner, but it's a sort of a version of nonviolent communication with a little bit of a spin.
And that's such an effective tool because it's really improved my quality, my level of communication since really trying to absorb more of that.
Yeah, we've had to, and we stop ourselves. We get in situations where we're triggered and not communicating well, and we have to remind ourselves
it's practice, not
of
perfection.
How to do that. Practice, not perfection. Yeah, that's a great point. I think the other thing, how you overcome these things is gaining a better understanding of yourself. And what makes you feel secure or insecure, your attachment styles, how you communicate, what you want, and how you communicate that with others. We talked about agreements, and we talked about one of the things we didn't talk about, but I think it's important, especially if you're opening up an existing relationship, is making a plan around how it sounds not very fun making a plan, but I think it's important to think about what the steps are you're going to take, what the baby steps are that feel comfortable to both people if you're opening an existing relationship, and then how you're going to check in regularly and review so that you keep progressing forward and dealing with situations sort of as they arise. So with all of that, our final warning is to you that you might just love this. It can be, being polyamorous for me has been extremely rewarding and fulfilling. And, you know, it's worth all the effort that we've put in. And now that stuff doesn't even feel like effort. It feels like things that have helped me grow. And that's, I think, one of the things that I've taken from this is that I'm going to make mistakes. There's things I'm going to learn, but I have the opportunity to grow. And and it is rewarding, isn't it?
It sure is.
It sure is.
Yeah.
Okay. So if you're facing any of these things, or new to polyamory or open relationships, and you want to make it feel good and enjoyable and secure, we wanted to share with you that we are doing a new course. I can't say it. It's our Poly Newbies course. So you don't have to necessarily be a newbie. You could be have jumped in already and experiencing some things. So this is a new course to give you the foundational elements to start in polyamory, open relationships, swinging, or lifestyle. So we go over and help you be aware of and deal with all of these risks, and just give you an introduction so you can start off on the right foot and avoid many of the newbie mistakes that many of us made. So save you some heartache in that. So we're starting this in September. So the first run, we're going to be doing the training live. So you get us live and in person, and it will be at a special price. So we'd love for you to join us. If you're interested, you can drop newbie in the chat, and I'll also post the link a little bit later.
Awesome.
Yeah.
Wow.
That was a good one. That went way longer than we thought.
Yeah, the hour was going to be 20 minutes, but here we are close to the top of the hour.
So I hope you found that helpful. And if you like this, please share with your friends, invite them to the group. If you're watching from our YouTube page, make sure you join our private group. And have an amazing Monday. Yeah. Thanks, André.
Thanks, sir. Thanks, everyone.
Thanks, everyone, for watching.
Bye.